Hi guys, and welcome to today's Taxidermy Tip Tuesday video. In today's video I'm going to talk to you very briefly about stabilising skins. This is a method that I've been using for the last 2 years, and if I compare the results that I get now using this method to when I didn't 2 years ago, I can say with certainty that it gives me great results. I've seen success with it, so I really hope that you find it useful, and if you have any questions, just leave them below. So in order to understand why we need to stabilise skins, we need to understand what's actually happening when something passes away. Now the skin is an organ, so it's provided with a blood supply when something is alive. Obviously when this thing dies, that blood supply is cut off and the carcass becomes susceptible to the processes of decomposition. It starts with purification, which essentially is bacterial growth on the skin, and what happens is this bacterial growth will weaken the follicles that connect fur or feather to the skin, therefore compromising the integrity of the specimen and thus potentially leading to fur loss or feather loss when you come to handle and work on the specimen. So very often as taxidermists we are at the mercy of other people to put the specimens in the freezer, whether that's a breeder or perhaps just a member of the public who finds the specimen. So it's very difficult to know quite how quickly the specimen was frozen after it died. That's why stabilising is a really good option. It gives you the chance to salvage the skin and prevent the bacteria from continuing to grow. However, it's really important to say that this is not a preservative. I'm not preserving the skin. I'm also not fixing the skin, so this would not be suitable for wet specimen fixative. I'm purely trying to stabilise the skin to prevent it from deteriorating further. So regrettably, this method doesn't work 100% of the time. Sometimes the skin is just too far gone. If a specimen has been laid outside, perhaps in a warm environment, that temperature can exacerbate the process of decomposition. So sometimes a bird might look perfect, but really it's very hard to tell how far a specimen really has gone until a taxidermist begins working on it. So don't be fooled, there are some tests that you can do, and I'm going to tell you about that now. So quite simply, one of the ways that you can test if a specimen is not appropriate for taxidermy is just to smell it. Now that might not be a very pleasant option, but it's the clearest way to indicate how far gone a specimen is. Just like if you're eating food, whether that's meat or vegetables, if you smell the product and it does not smell good, you're probably not going to want to work with it. It's exactly the same in taxidermy. So give it a smell, and if it smells bad, then it's probably too far gone. However, you can then run the next test to see whether or not it might still be salvageable. So the next thing that you can do is and you have to be really careful with this, don't sort of go too heavy-handed on it, but you can actually tug the feathers in vulnerable areas where the skin is very thin and it's more likely to slip quicker, slip being the deterioration of the follicles and therefore the feather and fur loss. Now the places that you can check the condition of the feathers or the fur is mostly around the belly and the abdomen, which obviously is where the toxins and the gases are, and probably one of the first places for the specimen to start to break down. Also on the face in very small birds and around the vent. So what you're looking for is to see how easily these feathers come away. Ideally you want to very gently tug on it and nothing will move. You move on to another part of the specimen, tug on that, it doesn't move, then the specimen is probably still suitable for taxidermy. However, if you're pulling it and clumps of feathers and fur are falling out, then your specimen has definitely been compromised and is too far past the point of working on, unfortunately. However, if there's a few feathers coming loose, but it doesn't seem to be too crazy, not massive clumps, then this is where stabilising might be appropriate, and I'm going to tell you about that now. So, in order to stabilise your specimens, you're going to need some isopropyl. And in order to work with isopropyl, obviously this is a very strong chemical. It's carcinogenic, so you're going to want to be really careful with the PPE that you use. I always use a respirator. I won't even open the jerry can if I'm not wearing my respirator. Make sure you're in a well-ventilated space. Goggles, I use vinyl gloves, but you can use any gloves that you find appropriate if you have any allergies. And that's how I would normally get set up for working with isopropyl. You are then going to need a spray gun. Now, I have about half a dozen of these spray guns in the workshop, and I label them all up so I know which one is which. I've got one with PVA, I've got one with water, I've got one with soapy water, I've got one with isopropyl, I've got one with methylated spirits, and obviously you want to make sure you're using the right tool for the job. These are really inexpensive. This is 99 pence from a hairdresser supply chain. So you can find these really easily, probably Amazon, probably eBay. So they're really inexpensive, and I definitely recommend having a few of these in the workshop, make sure they're labeled. Okay, so then what you're gonna need is a Tupperware with a lid. And you can get these really inexpensively on the internet as well, but make sure it does have a lid. These can be any size. It can be anywhere from this, which is probably what I would use for a small bird, a songbird, a goldfinch, a blue tit, a robin, etc., right up to a great big tub with a lid that you might use to store things under your bed or in the attic. So whatever is appropriate for the size of specimen that you're working with, and make sure that it has a lid. Okay, so what you're going to need to do is get your Tupperware. You're going to need to fill it about a third full with isopropyl. Now, I only ever use isopropyl neat. However, I do know that some people do dilute it. Now, I wonder if they're diluting it to make it stretch further economically. I can't answer for the quantities of what it would be if you were diluting it, because I only ever use it neat. But it's obvious that it does work diluted, so the option is there for you if you want to dilute it. So what you're then going to need to do is you're going to need to put your specimen inside, let it just sit in the liquid. It won't sit all the way in, but you're going to be able to rotate it during the process. Pop the lid on and pop it in the refrigerator or somewhere cold. Now, if it's a small specimen, you want to be always keeping it cold because, like I said earlier, the environment will definitely help to exacerbate any further bacterial growth, and you want to be keeping all of your specimens cool because also heat can speed up the process of the skin drying out, which is obviously the process of taxidermy, and we want to buy ourselves enough time as possible so we can mount the specimen in our own time. So I do want to say that I do have a work-specific refrigerator that I don't keep any food in. It's purely for me to control the drying times of my specimens, so don't be putting this isopropyl filled tub in a refrigerator that has food, because we don't want to be ingesting or having these fumes anywhere near our mouths or our noses. So make sure that you're putting it somewhere cold. If you don't have a refrigerator, maybe a garage, but nowhere near anything that you're going to then eat. It would definitely be counterintuitive to all of the PPE, but you can check on the specimen after 30-40 minutes. With a gloved finger, move the skin across the abdomen and see whether the skin's moving freely. If it is, then it's ready to skin. So the other thing to add is if you don't want to work with a wet specimen, some people don't like to skin specimens wet, it's just a preference thing. You can actually let your specimen thaw as you would normally to about 80%. I only ever work on specimens that are always at 80% thawed, because if it's too warm, like I say, you're running so many risks, and it's always better to keep your specimens nice and cold. If you are choosing to thaw your specimen and keeping it dry, you can just use the isopropyl neat by spraying it around where the incision will be, the vent, the abdomen and the face, and just applying it to those areas intermittently as you work throughout the process. Don't forget that obviously the fumes will still be in the air, so don't spray it with your mask on and then take your mask off, because you'll get a headache and it probably will be very detrimental to your long-term health. So one of the last things that I'd like to add is talking about a salt water wash. Now, before I do any detergent washes and after I've skinned and cleaned my specimen, I always do a salty water wash. Now, I'm using non-oxidized salt, which would be the same salt that you would be using to do the semi-preservative on a mammal. And you want to be doing a pretty concentrated amount of salt to the water. Now, obviously, it's very hard for me to give quantities because it all depends on the volume of water that you're using. You just want the solution to be super salty. You know, if you were to put your finger in it and taste it, don't do that, by the way. But if you were, hypothetically, then it would be really salty. It's pretty obvious, you know, make it a salt water. And I don't think there's any risk of putting too much salt in, because the salt is going to be dissolved by the water and you're only going to do it for about a 10-minute soak. So I do this with all birds except birds of prey. Birds of prey, I feel like, are a whole kettle of fish on their own, and I will talk to you a little bit more about them in another video. But the way that the feathers are designed is very different from other birds. The shape, the structure. Owls, for example, have these special sound buffering feathers that allow them to fly silently. So actually using certain things in conjunction with owls can actually damage the appearance of the feathers after they've been cleaned and washed. So don't use this method for owls, but yeah, I use it for all my other specimens, and I really hope that you find it useful. I hope I've not confused you. If you have any questions, then please let me know. And like I say, this is a tried and tested method. I found it to work, but like I say, it's not going to work with every single specimen. Every specimen is going to be unique in its death and in how quickly it gets into the freezer. So just remember that. And obviously it's devastating when we lose a specimen, but 9 times out of 10 you can normally salvage some parts, or you can take the skull out and use it as a spare part in case you have one that's got a crushed skull. So always trying to be resourceful and use as much of the specimen as possible. And good luck. I hope it helps, and I'll speak to you soon.